This is Photographing the West podcast, the podcast for people who love to explore the western highways and byways while photographing the landscape and wildlife. And now here's your host, Kirby Flanagan.
Hello and welcome to episode number 87 of the Photographing the West podcast. I'm your host, Kirby Flanagan. Welcome back. Today my guest is Clarke, a fine art photographer from Cleveland, Ohio, who also does some commercial work in addition to her fine art photography. Today, with Ren's help, we're going to do something different. We're going to spend quite a bit of time looking at and discussing several of her photos. Welcome, Ren.
Welcome, Kirby. Thanks for having me on today. It's nice to see you after so many years.
Yes, it is. It's nice to see you as well. Get a chance to catch up.
Yes.
So before we start looking at your photos, let's have you kind of introduce yourself and tell us about your photo career.
I'm located in outside of Cleveland, Ohio, and I've had my own graphic design firm since the early 80s, where I focused mainly on corporate identity design and collateral materials. And photography kind of took a behind the scenes of importance for me back then. But the last 10 years, it has become more and more to the forefront, and my photography has kind of taken off with the, I guess you might say, more and more companies are using photography, or artwork, I should say, in their corporations, hospitals, hospitality places. So I've kind of found a niche with my work, my commercial work there. So that's I love doing commercial work, but I also love experimenting with different kinds of photography, which we can talk about later.
Right. Yep. That's mainly what we're going to talk about today. So you mentioned you enjoy being experimental in your art and your photography and your printing. So let's take a look at some of your photos and talk about them, and you can explain the process and how you came up with the ideas and so forth.
Okay.
Okay. You can see it okay, I gather?
I can.
Okay.
So when I started doing composites, this is my latest project. And the picture that you're seeing right now kind of was the genesis for these composites. A number of years ago, I started to do gifts for friends of family who were having weddings, and I would take the bridal bouquet, deconstruct it, take copious images of each flower or plant, and then recompose them into a kind of a fine art portrait for the bride and groom as a gift. I think that started my whole composite mulling over in my head. When COVID hit at the end of February, I was, everybody's world just kind of closed down. I didn't mention this, but I'm also put on iPhone photography workshops around the country. And since COVID happened and everything closed down, I had to close my workshops and cancel them and hopefully reschedule them for this year. So I started walking with my dogs and taking my camera along every day and during the shutdown, because I needed to get out and get some exercise. So what happened from these walks every day is I started collecting more and more of these images of flowers and plants and birds and bees and butterflies and things. And I started thinking that maybe I can start making these composites again and kind of try to get everybody that follows me on Instagram, try to help them to get out of the doldrums, because everybody I talked to that was experiencing the shutdown was getting more and more down in the dumps. So I started creating these beautiful, fantastical landscapes based on the images I was taking on my walks. And I would count every day, day 32 of the shutdown, and I would say a little blurb, or I'd have a quote or something about the story that the image is projecting to the viewer. And I would also throw in little, if you remember back many years ago, Where's Waldo? I would throw in little insects and things within the image, out of scale, totally out of scale, and just see if people can find them. So it was kind of a game. So this is what I started doing, and it started taking off. And I would get comments from people that say they looked forward to my images every day because it made them feel so happy. And based on what was happening in the world. So that's what's kept me going on these images. The one you see here is towards probably in April, early May is when the egrets and the heron babies are born. And I thought I would do kind of a play on a story on the baby birds. And what I do is I create, I pre-visualize and I think about a storyline, and then I think, well, what colors do I want to project in this? Do I want to be somber? Do I want to be excited with oranges, or calm with blues and greens? And this was kind of a somber, kind of pure looking image because the bird is so pure, I think, and with just pops of orange. The next one that you have.
Before we go to the next one,
Okay.
How do you manage these incredibly complex composites in great detail?
Well, a lot of it, I've collected so many images throughout the years because I needed them for my workshops. I also needed them for these wedding photography things, and so I've had a library of all these things. Masking is the biggest problem, or not problem, but challenge to teach yourself to be a good masker. So each image has to be masked. The background has to be masked out usually. So what I do is, as I said, create a storyline, and then choose the birds. I choose the flowers that go with the birds and the butterflies. And then I realized you can't just lay them on that blank white image or piece of paper. You have to create depth. And that's where textures come in. And I have a slew of textures that I've bought from the internet, or, you can download a number of them for free. So different cloud formations and using color creates the depth and I think interest that leads your eye in and out of these images.
So do you mask these by hand, or do you use the Photoshop tool, or?
I do not use the Wacom tablet, which I have, but I don't use it. And people will probably be shocked, but I feel like I have more control with Photoshop, and the new Photoshop has a wonderful masking capability that just came out, and so I've been using that a lot, and I like it. The other masking tool I use is Topaz Remask, which I think is an excellent product, and that is very good for masking out. Like if you see on this one the moss that's hanging down. That's very delicate, and hair on people's, heads is very hard to mask out. So things like that, Topaz is really good at.
Oh, good to know.
Yes.
Okay. I had to think that if you were doing this by hand with the pen tool, it would take you months. So.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes it takes me hours to get something created. Sometimes it usually takes me days. And so when I have an off, when I have some time that I'm not doing something that I'm supposed to be doing, I usually go in and start masking just kind of on the sly. So I have these in reserve.
Okay. Sounds like a good plan. Let me get over to the next one here. There we go.
And this one is all about the starlings that I was on my walks in the woods would see. And I love the starling with the main starling with the orange legs. And I thought, oh, I'll just kind of pop out that color in this composite and, bring in the orange, and then the opposite color on the color wheel is purple. So I like to kind of put those things together. Designers, whether you're a graphic designer or a photographer, you really should, I think, educate yourself on the color wheel and what colors can make, or how colors can make or break an image. I also, and this was the background was taken down in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, which is near to us, which you are familiar with. And
Sure.
there's I call it the swamp, but it's not a swamp. It's where all the herons are. And so I had a number of landscape pictures that I used as background for this, and just kind of layered them using the blending modes in Photoshop. And it's amazing what you can create if you just, kind of know a certain amount of tools. You don't have to be an expert on Photoshop. You just have to really have a kind of a know what you're going to aim for, I guess.
Yeah, have a toolkit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed you snuck a heron in there down in the weeds.
Some people don't see that. I also snuck sometimes I sneak some caterpillars and maybe in the other ones, but there's a couple butterflies, and there's a moth, a hummingbird moth that was coming out at that time in the spring.
Well, these composites are amazing. It's the only word for it, and I admire your energy and your patience in putting them together.
Well, I'm working on another one, a couple more this week, because it's National Pollinators Week, I found out. And I thought, oh, this is perfect, right up my alley. So I started researching pollinators in our area and what plants go with what, insects and birds. So stay tuned.
Okay. Yeah, I look forward to it. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and look at a couple of Western landscapes.
Okay.
So here's one from the Oregon coast, I believe.
Oh, yeah. So I think it was back in 2017, our family took a trip out to Portland and Oregon specifically. We rented a house on Cannon Beach. And I had never been out to Oregon, so this was brand new to me. It was absolutely spectacular. And I had a chance to, when I travel a lot and I'm in places I've never been, I usually like to hire a photographer, a local photographer, to take me around. And because they always have all the secret places that they go to. So I hired this guy to take me around one morning, and we just had the best time. And it was foggy, the tide had just come out, and I was around this big pile of I think they were clams or oysters. I'm not sure what clings to those rocks, but and I popped my head up, and there was this crabber standing on the top of the one of the boulders, crabbing, and I thought, oh, this is perfect. So, this was one of my favorite shots, and of being out there. We went into the forest, I call it the primeval forest, because they have to be ancient trees there. Have you traveled there a lot?
Yeah, I've been there a couple different times, and it's a beautiful area, no doubt about it.
Well, when we went, we were there the summer of the big fire. So right before the fire came out in the Columbia River area near Multnomah Falls, that's when we were there. So we were lucky to see everything before it was burned
Yeah,
to the
guess
ground.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is kind of a typical Oregon coast summer day because it's quite often they're foggy, especially in the morning. So, but you
And
captured
really,
it.
all the pictures that I took, most of the pictures I took in Oregon were black and whites because it just kind of lended itself to I think that technique. I just love, and long exposures. I worked with long exposures. So that was fun to hone, certain skills I hadn't used in a long time.
Right. Yeah. Well, you did an excellent job here.
Thank you.
So we're going to skip to Eastern Washington and the Palouse.
Palouse. So anyone who has a chance to go to the Palouse should go, any photographer. I went on a workshop with John Barkley the year after I went to Oregon. And I have family in this area, so it was kind of a nice time to spend a lot of time out there. I had seen pictures of the Palouse, but pictures don't do it justice. And as you can tell, the fields, you see every shade of green and yellow that you can possibly imagine of I think it's, what's the yellow that grows there?
Canola.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And, this is an iconic image view from Steptoe Butte that everybody takes. But, this was my first view. So this was kind of my favorite. But, you can play around with, abstracts in this area. I would really recommend people visit it. If you've been there a lot too?
Just one time. I spent several days there, and it's a gorgeous area, and you managed to take a unique photo of the area. I think not one I've seen before, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of typical one is I don't know what direction it is actually, but it's a little bit different direction than this one. But this works very well with all the different textures and the the rolling hills and the different contours and all that. Just gorgeous.
Yeah, thank you. It was a lot of fun, let me tell you.
It is a fun place to visit.
Yeah.
Okay. Now these are hand painted, I think, if I've got that right.
Yeah. So these, I took a workshop out at Santa Fe Workshops with Kate Brakey, who does these beautiful hand painted photographs. And so she was teaching out there, and I was lucky enough to get into her class for a week. And basically, hand painting is an old process. I would watch my father when I was younger hand paint his photographs after he would develop them in his darkroom. And so I thought, wouldn't this be fun to kind of learn how to do? So basically, you take a black and white photo that you've printed on probably a very, what I did is printed on, I think, Hannah Mule's cotton rag paper, which has a little bit of tooth, but not a whole lot of texture on it. And so you take a black and white photo and you print it on this paper, and then you begin to transform it. It's almost meditative. You can use, colored pencils. I think you can see the colored pencil lines in here. You start with, I think, Marshall oils, which are you can not water down, but thin out with turpentine. Turpentine. Some people use watercolors to paint their photographs. But this again was another project that was very meditative, and I wanted to show the more abstract kind of vibrancy of this flower. I think this was a peony also.
I'm not sure. You didn't say in the.
Okay. could have been. Yeah, it's a peony, and I wanted to show how fragile it was, but also how elegant it was in terms of the lines and the texture.
Yeah. Well, that must require an incredible amount of patience once again.
Yeah, it does. I think all these processes do, and it's teaching. Man, that's not my middle name. Patience is not my middle name. I want things done right away. So this has been a very good process. All of these have been a good process for me to make me slow down. Even the quarantine has made me slow down. So that's a good thing for everybody.
Yeah, I guess to a certain point anyway.
Yeah.
So here's another hand-colored one.
Yeah, and this is a sycamore pod.
Okay.
And it's really, it looks large here, which it is in the image, but it's actually maybe 2 or 3 inches in circumference. And again, I have a series of these sycamore pods that I would collect along my walks in the woods. And some of them are hanging from thread-like branches, which I show here. Some are just by themselves. And I did a series of, I think, 6 of these hand-colored. And this was the one that took a long time because each one of the little feather things you see in the pod was a stroke with a colored pencil that you had to keep sharp. And so it was a good lesson in slowing down, as you say.
Yeah, I guess so.
But I had to capture the light, and where the light hits and where the shadow then fades the bottom of the pod. It was very difficult to do,
Yeah,
but I liked how it turned out.
yeah, it's again gorgeous, and the lighting on here is amazing, especially if you painted it in.
I know it.
So I'm going to look at a couple of your different print techniques. This is the same image, but it's printed differently, I gather. Well, it's not
Yes,
the same image.
it is the same image. It's so back in January, I had taken another couple classes on a process called photopolymer gravure a couple years ago up in New Hampshire, and came back to Cleveland and wanted to really get into it. And photopolymer gravure is the same type of process as photogravure from way back when, but the photopolymer gravure uses water instead of acid. So it's something that I could do in my own studio, and I didn't need, a dark room and acid baths and everything else. So I thought this was real, and I loved the end result, what they look like, the etchings from the past. So in January, I went to a studio downtown here called Zygote Press, and they had all the equipment that was required for me to learn this process and to start going on it. I rented space, I was all set to go, and I got a couple images printed in the end of January, beginning of February. I kept going, and then they closed down. So again, I have to put this process on hold until they are ready to set up. And I don't know what if and when this is going to happen, because they're only allowing two people in at a time, and it's not really conducive to being creative and making your plates and printing on a printing press. And so I'm kind of putting this on the back burner for now, but I really want to finish it up whenever we get out of this mess.
Yeah.
And the next one that I sent you.
Before we move along, a couple questions.
Yeah.
So what's the substrate you're actually printing on?
You're printing on any paper you want. It's mostly a photo rag again. That they actually, you can use a Japanese paper, I like to use different Japanese papers in my work. This was probably printed on a cotton rag again. What other printmakers use? They use, I can't remember their names. But, again, it's like a cotton rag, and it doesn't have any brightening agents in it. So it accepts the ink readily and very well. So, and you print, what you do is you create a negative from the computer, and it's just a film negative that you end up exposing to a polymer plate, in a dark room for X amount of minutes. There's a whole long technique to do this. I'm just shortening it up a little. And then you have to wash it with water, and that's what brings out the etching look. And then you have to ink the plate like you would any sort of intaglio plate, and wipe off the ink. It's again very time consuming. And then you put it in the printing press and put the paper over it. And you use one of the old printing presses with the big wheel, and you hopefully create a beautiful piece of art. So that's what I'm hoping to get back into in a couple months.
Well, let's hope, huh?
Yeah.
The lighting on here looks different.
It's different. Yeah. Yeah. I use the lighting probably is different because this was straight from the black and white print, and I didn't play around with any of the lighting. Like hand coloring, you can do whatever you want. You can make the lighting come from whatever angle you want. So on here, you're kind of stuck with where the lighting was.
Oh. Well, it's beautiful. It's just looked a little different. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving along to the next one.
So again, I'm using my botanical images that I have. And again, this is the photopolymer gravure. And I used, I thought I'd make a little composite and threw in some, it's kind of a love letter, I think, in the background, and a texture with a vignette. And this in person I love because the technique that you use in this is so fragile looking. I just love the effect. And so I can't wait to do more of these. And then you can, after you're done and this is dried, you can then apply color if you want. You can go into the hand coloring if you want. And, go from there. You can incise the plate. So you've got, marks that are, embedded in the plate. You can do all sorts of creative things.
Yeah, I guess so. It looks like something from the late 1800s, I guess. When they were...
Mm-hmm.
So very unique.
Thank you.
Well, let's move along to, this is your commercial work.
Yes, so this was a restaurant, a beautiful restaurant in Cleveland called Cru Uncorked. It's a very high-end French-American cuisine. And they had asked me they commissioned me to go out to Napa Valley, which was nice, to go into the vineyards and take some images of different vineyards and the picking of the grapes and the harvesting and everything. And I just had a blast doing this. And so what you're looking at are two murals that were chosen for the restaurant in one of the rooms. They have 4 different rooms. And this is called the terroir room. And the one on the left is just a kind of, and this sounds crazy, but it's kind of a drive-by. Oops.
Sorry about that.
It's kind of a drive-by image of the a close-up of the vines. And the reason why it's that color is because I was there after the harvest, and the leaves were changing, and they wanted to kind of really play up the orange and yellow tones, because that's what the restaurant was being based on. And the one on the right then is broken into two sections, and that was basically just going up. I do have a drone, and I was using a drone to take aerial shots of this vineyard, and I almost got arrested on this one, because I didn't. I had a license, but I didn't realize that Napa Valley had little airports all around, and someone stopped me and said, do you have permission to do this? And I said, well, I have my license, but I don't have, the actual permission. And they said, well, you could be thrown in jail and fined, I don't know, $150,000 or something if you get caught. So I had to put my drone down. So I didn't want to get put in jail. And so this is kind of an afterthought with my big camera on a tripod, and the sun was coming up, and the hills were just coming out of their fog, and they wanted just kind of a feel of spaciousness and location, I guess. So that's why they picked that. And then I didn't send you the other ones, but then in one of the other rooms, there are 4 very, very large photographs of showing the crushing of the grapes, kind of, a large close-up of the grapes themselves before they're picked off the vines, and just two other ones that were mostly close-ups, more abstract looking, and just to kind of give the visitor to the restaurant a sense of where they, that they're in, they're not really in Cleveland. They're in a vineyard. They're being surrounded by wonderful, beautiful grapes.
Right. Yeah. Very nice effect.
Thank you.
And let's see, we've got one more of your commercial work here. There we go.
And this was a client hired me to take a picture of their Japanese maple tree that they had planted. I want to say 30 years before as they started actually was a wine business, wholesale wine business, and they planted this tree outside of their office. And 30 years later, they were selling the business, and they wanted me to take pictures of that same tree, which is obviously grown up, in showing each of the seasons. And so it was a year-long project, obviously. So this is, each of the 4 seasons that, I collaborated with the client and what she wanted. And these were printed on this very thin Japanese paper that I had bought from a company, a factory in Japan called Awagami Factory. And for those of you that are listening, it's a wonderful, if you go on their website, they do sell to photographers. They sell specific photography papers if you're looking for something unusual to print your photography on. So these were printed on that paper, and I was nervous that they would look a little too wrinkled. Like some of them they have the wavy lines, but I think the client wanted that look. We first thought about maybe hanging them from scrolls, how the Japanese scrolls would hang, but she was afraid they would be too fragile and that they would be destroyed, down the road. So we ended up framing them in a very plain, a silver frame that's kind of just non-indiscreet. And I think they loved them. So this was a fun job to work on also.
So it must be kind of stressful to have to photograph to satisfy a client's needs like that. either this one or the preceding one.
It is very stressful. I mean, you have to be almost a psychiatrist or psychologist to kind of read into their mind to see what they're thinking, because a lot of clients can't verbalize what they want. And so I have one now that he's very, very in love with his garden, and he wants me to take pictures of it, but I don't think he really knows what that entails or what the end result he really wants. So we're in the middle of trying to figure that out right now.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, how much of your work is commercial versus the fine art?
Well, I'd say lately I'm doing more and more commercial, and when I say commercial, it's people that have heard of me or heard about my work, word of mouth. The commercial end, I've got a lot of images in hospitals and in corporations and in restaurants, and it helps to have. A number of years ago, I came in contact with, I guess they're called art consultants that, can market artists' works around to different areas. And so she's helped me place a lot of my images in hospitals and different places like that. The rest is, marketing yourself and learning how to do that. I mean, that takes up a lot of time, and I'm not very good at that. I don't really use Facebook a lot. I use Instagram more so, and I think that is getting me more and more followers, which is nice. But it's so I'd say the commercial end is probably, I don't know, 3/4, and the rest is the fun things that I like to do, and maybe will turn into commercial work later on down the road.
Well, it sounds like you've been very successful. That's not an easy area to get started in, I wouldn't think.
No, it's not. But you have to know your market, I guess. What sells these. If you're interested in selling and just that's what you're interested in, then make images that sell to that market. I'm more interested in doing what I love to do, and if people like it and want to buy it, I think that's more important to me right now.
Sure, but pays the bills too, I suppose.
Right. It does.
They must have a lot of confidence in your work if they send you out to Napa Valley to photograph out there.
I brought my husband along as my Sherpa.
Okay.
He loved it.
I would imagine so. Did a lot of wine tasting, I suppose.
Oh yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to ask you about, you've shown your work in a lot of different venues. Does that help your sales and help your commercial work, or is it just something you enjoy doing?
Well, I enjoy doing it. It does help my sales. When people see images in hospitals, it's nice when you have somebody that says, "Oh, I saw your one of your images at XYZ hospital." That doesn't mean it's going to garner a sale down the road. It might, but
right.
I think a lot of it is you have to get yourself out there, and that's hard for most artists to do because I think most of us are kind of shy and don't really like to talk about our work a lot. This is very hard for me right now, actually. But it's hard to. You've got to research. Getting in touch with maybe local architects or interior designers if you want to get into that market. That's a huge market. The restaurant market, restaurants now, that's probably not going to be a good market because there are a lot of restaurants that'll probably be closing down. But hospitals and corporations are more and more putting artwork in their facilities.
Yeah, I've noticed that in the hospitals anyway, and yeah, I always enjoy looking at them. So we haven't talked about what gear you use. When you said big camera, I'm guessing you have a large format 4x5 or something like that.
No, I have a Canon full frame 5D Mark IV.
Oh,
I just bought a mirrorless camera, the cheaper R3, which I wanted to try before I went. I'm not real sold on mirrorless yet, although it is lighter, and the older we get, the nicer it is not to carry around all that equipment. But I'm not too keen yet on it. And of course, I've got my iPhone 11 Pro Max, which I use a lot for my, just walking in the woods sort of thing. The lenses, I've got my 70 to 200, 16 to 35. I stay with Canon, a 50 millimeter fixed. When I was out in Oregon, I wanted to try some new neutral density filters. And so there's a new company called Breakthrough Photography. Have you heard of their filters?
no, I don't think so.
Oh, they're so I bought a set, and so I'm using them right now, and I kind of like them. Really bright stuff I use a lot of, tripod, and
Right.
my camera bag is a think tank, which I love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how are you able to make those extremely large prints then from 35 millimeter?
Well, the prints we're looking at now, I actually used the resize in Topaz. Topaz has a resize plugin that will enlarge your photographs and make them work fine. I did not print these personally. I found a woman actually out in Washington State, which was she was using the same paper that I was using, and she had a large printer, which I asked her to help me out with, which she did a beautiful job. There is the Cleveland Institute of Art here in town, which has a commercial printing lab open to the public, which will allow me to print anything over my 17-inch wide printer. I've got a Epson 3380 and only prints up to 17 inches wide. And so I can always go to them and they will print my images. And I can just bring them the paper I want, and they're great. So it's nice to have an art school in town. Yeah.
That's very neat.
Yeah.
The amount of detail in these large photos is pretty amazing. So,
well, Topaz also has something called, and I haven't used it yet, Gigapixel. Have you ever used that yet?
no, I know of Topaz, but I always hate to try to learn a new piece of software if I don't have to. But I'm beginning to think I am going to have to learn Topaz because they have some pretty nice results.
Well, all this AI, artificial intelligence, they're applying to their plugins, and it's extraordinary what you can do now, I guess. So I'm going to check out the Topaz Gigapixel and see what that's like.
Yeah, be interested how that goes for you.
Yeah.
So you just have the two. I shouldn't say just, but you have the two cameras, the large Canon and the mirrorless. Any other?
That's all I have. Okay. I'm whittling down my equipment.
Yeah, me too. As you say, as you get older, carrying around those heavy camera bags isn't much fun anymore.
No. So I can't think of why I would want anything other than what I have. I mean, it fits all in my camera bag, and I'm just a happy camper. As long as, as long as I'm in good health, I'm okay.
Yeah, I'm the same. I've kind of got to the point where I'm happy with what I have, and it does what I need to do. So don't have that equipment lust that I had when I was younger, I guess.
But I've always, this is just kind of an aside. I read somewhere many years ago that a photographer was upset when somebody asked them what kind of gear they have, and he gave the statement. He said it's like asking a chef what kind of oven he cooks with. It's like it's not the camera that makes the image. It's it's really the person behind the camera that creates what, to me, I think creates the image. And I think we can all get beautiful images from whatever we're using, as long as we know our equipment well.
Very true. Well, before we go, tell everyone where they can find you and your work and all about you.
I have a website called Clarke Photography. That's Clarke with an E. Ryn, R-Y-N. Maybe you can, I don't know if you can put it up on the screen or not, but so that's my website that you can go to. And I'm on Instagram at Ryn Clarke Photography. And I'm on Facebook, not that much though. And I'm on LinkedIn with probably Ryn Clarke.
Okay. Well, I'll put all those in the show notes so people can track you down if they're so inclined. So It's been great fun catching up after all these years.
Yes, and I'd love to talk to you again. I love doing this, Kirby. Anytime you want to talk about any of the processes, let me know.
Yeah, we'll have to do that for sure. So thanks to the audience for tuning in once again. Show notes are at www.flanaganphotos.com. Audio and video versions of the podcast can be found at www.flanaganphotos.com once again, on iTunes and YouTube, as well as most RSS feeds. So bye for now, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with another interview with an interesting photographer doing interesting things. Bye for now.
Bye for now. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Photographing the West podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast in iTunes and leave us a review. Till next time, here's wishing you safe travels and good light.